You are looking at the bottom of Lake Tahoe. How about that? Nearly 1,500 feet below the surface. And those little particles you see floating around there are rich with nutrients.
There are places on this planet that human beings have never truly seen. Not because we lack the curiosity, but because we lack the technology. For over a century, Lake Tahoe was one of those places. Stretching across the border of California and Nevada high in the Sierra Nevada mountain range, it is one of the most visited, most photographed, and most talked about lakes in North America. Millions of people have stood on its shores, stared out at its famously blue water, and assumed they understood what they were looking at. They were wrong. Because what lies beneath the surface of Lake Tahoe has almost nothing to do with the stories people tell about it, and everything to do with science that most people have never been taught. In September 2025, a team of researchers and engineers did something that had never been done before. They sent a remotely operated underwater vehicle, equipped with high-definition cameras, powerful LED lighting systems, and a live transmission uplink, down to the very bottom of Lake Tahoe. All the way down, 1,645 feet beneath the surface, into water that has not seen sunlight since before recorded human history. Thousands of people watched the live stream in real time. And what the cameras revealed did not match a single famous legend ever told about this lake. What it found was simultaneously less dramatic and far more scientifically significant than anyone had imagined. To understand why this dive mattered so much, you first have to understand what Lake Tahoe actually is. Not the postcard version, but the geological reality. Lake Tahoe did not form the way most lakes form. It was not carved by glaciers retreating at the end of the last ice age, and it was not created by a river damming itself over centuries. About 2 million years ago, a massive block of the Earth's crust simply dropped. The Sierra Nevada range pushed upward to the west. The Carson Range rose to the east. And the basin between them collapsed, creating a natural bowl so deep and so steep-sided that it filled with water and never stopped. The result is a body of water 22 miles long, 12 miles wide, and sitting at over 6,000 feet of elevation. It holds an estimated 39 trillion gallons of fresh water, enough, as geologists like to note, to submerge the entire state of California under more than a foot of water. At its deepest point, near the northeastern section of the lake called Crystal Bay, the floor lies 1,645 feet below the surface. Only Crater Lake in Oregon is deeper among freshwater lakes in the United States. But the depth alone is not what makes Lake Tahoe scientifically extraordinary. It is what the depth creates. Below roughly 700 feet, the water temperature in Lake Tahoe maintains a near-constant 39 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. That number is not arbitrary. 39 degrees Fahrenheit is precisely the temperature at which fresh water achieves its maximum density. The water becomes so heavy, so tightly packed at the molecular level, that it simply sits there. It does not circulate. It does not warm in summer or change dramatically in winter. It does not move the way water in shallower lakes moves. And because it does not move, it does not decay things the way warmer water does. Bacterial decomposition, the process by which organic matter breaks down in most aquatic environments, slows to a near halt in water that cold. Organic material that would dissolve and disappear in a warm river within weeks can remain recognizable in Lake Tahoe for decades. This is not folklore. This is chemistry. And the evidence for it is documented, verified, and sitting in scientific literature. In July 1994, a 44-year-old Reno city planner named Donald Christopher Windecker went scuba diving near a stretch of shoreline called Rubicon Point on the lake's western edge. He was an experienced diver. He did not surface. Search teams covered the lake for days. Eventually, the search was called off. At the depth where Windecker was believed to have descended, conventional recovery methods simply could not reach him. The lake kept him. It kept him for 17 years. In 2011, a team of technical divers using specialized mixed gas equipment descended past normal recreational depth limits in the same area and found a body resting on a rock ledge at 265 feet. The remains were intact enough to be identified visually as a human being in scuba gear. An underwater robot was deployed to recover the body. Dental records confirmed the identity. Donald Windecker had spent nearly 2 decades on the floor of Lake Tahoe in 39-degree water, and the medical examiner's report determined his remains were preserved well enough to rule out homicide.
This is the case that grounded the science in something tangible and undeniable. But it also exposed the gap between what the science actually says and what internet mythology claims. Because for decades, the most popular story about Lake Tahoe's preservation properties has not been about lost divers. It has been about organized crime. The legend insists that the mob used Lake Tahoe as a dumping ground for murder victims throughout the mid-20th century, that somewhere on the floor, in the cold and the dark, there are bodies in pinstripe suits with cement shoes, stacked like an underwater cemetery. Investigative journalists, professional dive teams, and research institutions have gone looking for that evidence repeatedly across several decades. The Reno Gazette-Journal investigated it. Fact-checking organizations investigated it. Dive teams went down with the specific goal of finding something, anything, that supported the claim. None of them found it. The mob graveyard of Lake Tahoe is a story with no physical evidence behind it, a legend that got repeated often enough that people started treating it as established fact. What actually rests on the lake floor is more interesting, and far more legitimate. In August 1940, a historic passenger and cargo vessel called the SS Tahoe was towed out from the Glenbrook area on the lake's eastern shore and deliberately sunk. The ship had been the workhorse of the lake for over 4 decades, carrying mail, passengers, and supplies between resort towns during the era when roads into the Tahoe Basin were seasonal and unreliable. When she was retired, the decision was made to scuttle her in relatively shallow water, around 100 feet, so that glass-bottomed tour boats could give visitors a view of her from the surface. It did not go according to plan. The underwater terrain near Glenbrook does not slope gently. It drops sharply into one of the steepest underwater walls in the entire lake basin. When the ship was opened to the water, she did not settle at the intended depth. She slid down the slope. By the time she stopped moving, her bow was resting at approximately 360 feet, and her stern lay at 475 feet, far beyond the reach of any tourist boat and far beyond any recreational diver of the era. She sat there, unseen and untouched, for 62 years. In 2002, a technical dive team using mixed gas equipment and carefully calculated decompression schedules finally reached her. What they found stunned them. The brass deck fittings still gleamed. The wooden interior paneling had not rotted away. The painted lettering on the hull was still legible. A ship that had been at the bottom of a lake for over 6 decades looked, by the accounts of the divers who reached her, as though she had been scuttled recently. The cold water had done exactly what the chemistry predicts. In 2004, the SS Tahoe became the first maritime listing on the National Register of Historic Places in the state of Nevada. She is still down there today. But the ships were placed there deliberately, by people who knew what they were doing. The next discovery on the Tahoe lake floor was placed there by no one, and what it tells us about climate is something that should command far more attention than it currently receives. In the 1930s, during one of the most severe droughts in Sierra Nevada history, water levels in Lake Tahoe dropped low enough that researchers near the shoreline began noticing tree stumps emerging from the shallows, stumps that had been hidden underwater for so long that no living person had ever seen them. A UC Berkeley researcher named Samuel Harding documented submerged stumps near Taylor Creek that were still rooted upright in the lake bed, exactly where the trees had grown thousands of years earlier. Carbon dating eventually placed some of these stumps between 4,800 and 6,300 years old. Decades later, a University of Nevada Reno researcher noticed his fishing lures kept catching on something deep in a neighboring lake. He investigated. What he and a team from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography eventually documented, published in the peer-reviewed journal Quaternary Science Reviews in 2011, was an underwater forest of pine trees still standing upright on the lake floor, rooted where they had grown centuries ago. Some of the trees dated to approximately 1250 AD. Others were older, dating back roughly 2,300 years. These were not driftwood. They had not drifted and somehow propped themselves upright. They had grown there, along an ancient shoreline, during a period when the lake level was hundreds of feet lower than it is today. What killed them was a returning climate. The trees are physical evidence of a prolonged megadrought, a roughly 200-year period during the medieval warm interval when the Sierra Nevada received so little precipitation that the lake shrank dramatically. When the rains finally returned, the lake refilled fast enough that the trees drowned in place, still standing. The water rose around them before they could fall. The implications of this are not historical. They are immediate. If Lake Tahoe's water level can drop by hundreds of feet during a naturally occurring drought that lasted 2 centuries, and if such a drought occurred less than 1,000 years ago, then the assumptions underlying California's entire water management infrastructure rest on a climatic baseline that may not be normal, only recent. Which brings us back to September 2025, and the footage that changed how researchers talk about this lake. The remotely operated vehicle, named Deep Emerald, nicknamed Emmy by the team, was deployed by a non-profit organization working in partnership with underwater engineering specialists. It was rated for depths far exceeding anything recreational divers could reach. It carried high-definition cameras, specialized lighting designed for zero-visibility deep water conditions, and a live-stream uplink that allowed both the research team and the watching public to see the descent as it happened. The trip to the bottom took roughly 35 minutes. More than 3,500 people watched it live. Tens of thousands more viewed the footage in the days that followed. What Emmy's cameras captured at 1,600 feet was this: silt. Sediment. A flat, barren landscape of fine particles drifting slowly in the lights like underwater snow. No creatures of unusual size. No wreckage of unknown origin. No stacked bodies, no hidden structures, no evidence of anything that the legends had promised. The bottom of Lake Tahoe, at its absolute deepest point, was, by every visual measure the cameras could apply, empty. But the emptiness was itself the scientific finding. Researchers explained that the sediment Emmy was photographing is composed of roughly 6 to 7% organic material. The rest is inorganic granite-derived particles, eroded from the surrounding mountain ranges over geological timescales and slowly settling through the water column, a process that takes decades for a single particle to complete. This gradual settling is one of the primary mechanisms by which Lake Tahoe maintains its legendary water clarity. The bottom of the lake is not a place where things accumulate dramatically. It is a place where geology performs, very slowly, the work of filtration. What Emmy also found, scattered among the sediment, was manufactured trash. Tires. Discarded fishing equipment. Debris that had no business being at that depth in an alpine lake. The same research organization had already pulled approximately 80 tires from various depths in previous expeditions. The lake's floor is not a repository of mob history. It is a repository of what happens when one of the most heavily visited alpine lakes in North America is treated carelessly by the millions of people who use it every year. Lake Tahoe sits on top of an active geological fault, the West Tahoe Fault, that runs the length of the basin beneath the deepest water. Researchers from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography have published findings indicating that this fault produces a magnitude 7 earthquake roughly every 3 to 4,000 years. The most recent major rupture occurred approximately 4,500 years ago. By that rhythm, the next event is statistically overdue. When a fault beneath a lake of this depth ruptures, the result is not simply an earthquake felt on shore. It is a tsunami in an enclosed freshwater basin. The initial wave, according to modeling by researchers at UC Davis and Scripps, could reach between 10 and 33 feet in height, traveling across the lake fast enough to reach shoreline communities within minutes. After the initial impact, a phenomenon called a seiche, a back-and-forth sloshing in an enclosed water body, can continue hammering the same shorelines for hours. Tens of thousands of people live in communities around Lake Tahoe's shores. None of those communities have functional tsunami evacuation infrastructure, because no one in modern memory has experienced such an event here. The geological record shows clearly that it has happened before. A massive underwater landslide on the lake's western shore, the McKinney Bay Slide, deposited a triangular block of mountain roughly a mile across and 400 feet thick into the lake, likely generating a wave of extraordinary scale. The debris from that event is still on the lake floor. The conditions that produced it have not changed. Lake Tahoe is not the lake that the legends describe. The mob graveyard is fiction. The ancient monsters are fiction. The Navy submarines and the Cousteau quotes and the underwater civilizations are fiction. What is real is stranger, and more consequential, than any of it. A drowned forest that proves a 200-year drought happened less than 1,000 years ago. A ship that looks new after 8 decades on the bottom. A fault line beneath the deepest water, overdue by geological standards. And a population of millions living downstream of all of it, largely unaware of what the water is sitting on. The footage from that September 2025 dive did not reveal a monster. It revealed something more uncomfortable, a lake that has been misunderstood for generations, hiding not secrets, but science, and a warning that the geology has been issuing for thousands of years.